Welcome, everybody. My name is Jakop Dalunde, a member of the European Parliament from the Greens from Sweden. I've served 2 terms here in the Parliament in the Transport Committee, but my life as a railway enthusiast began quite long ago. It was in the early 90s when my father took me on a cross-European trip from Stockholm to Costa Blanca in eastern Spain. And I remember so strongly when the train crossed the border between Denmark and Germany, and my father told me, now we're entering Germany. It's almost like Sweden and Denmark, but a bit different, more continental. And this way of traveling, not only teleporting yourself in a tin can from one airport to another, but rather experiencing the journey, and that the destination is only the reason for the traveling, but also the journey and the experiences, the people that you meet, and the conversation that struck out when you sit there together for multiple hours. And back then it was actually quite easy to travel by rail. I remember when I took my first journey, I could go to Stockholm Central at the ticketing booth for SJ, the Swedish operator, and I could just ask them, well, I want to travel from Stockholm and I want to go to Florence. And the service person would just sit there and talk to me for free. I mean, I had to pay for the tickets, but the service was provided for me free of charge. And I think we were standing there for almost 20 minutes discussing various options, and then they would book me the route. Very simple. But since those kinds of services are no longer provided by most European operators, and those who want to journey with multiple operators across border are there to fend for themselves. As a response to this, groups are forming all across Europe to start changing this. And in Sweden, we have the Facebook group called Tågsemester, or Train Vacation. It's actually one of Sweden's largest Facebook groups with more than 220,000 members, which is quite a sizable portion of the Swedish population. And the number one question that the members of this group are asking is not, what does it cost? Is it nice? The main question is, how do you book the ticket? And one could imagine the existence of a Facebook group called Flygsemester, or Flying Vacation, where hundreds of thousands of citizens would gather on the question, well, how do you book an airplane ticket? People always chuckle when I mention this, but one has to remember that a couple of decades ago, that was actually the case. A couple of decades ago, you couldn't go online, you couldn't download an app, type in, oh, I am in Berlin and I want to fly to LAX or Tokyo Haneda, and then see all the alternatives and book the journey easily with an app or a service. You actually, back in the day, had to go to a ticket vendor who would advise you how to fly. But then we made a lot of changes, both legally and within the airline organization, and the system was standardized, and now it's quite easy to book an airline ticket. And this is the same kind of development that we need for the railway sector. And that is why I'm so glad that you are here. We had hoped that the Commission would have presented a proposal on this issue on this term, MDMS, but now it looks like we have to wait until the next term for the Commission to present a proposal on multimodal ticketing. And in advance of this, I have commissioned this report, Simplifying European Ticketing, written by railway export extraordinaire, Mr. Jon Worth, who will in a minute present this report. And after the presentation of the report, we have a really good panel who would comment now. And we have Robin Loos, Senior Transport Policy Officer at the European Consumer Organization BEUC. We have Chiara Tomasi, Head of Government Relations at the ticketing vendor Trainline. We have Victor Thévenet, Rail Policy Manager at Europe's most important NGO on transport and environment, aptly named Transport and Environment. We have Delphine Gransart, Senior Researcher at the European Passenger Federation. What a panel, what expertise. Sure, some might say that this panel is lacking a critical voice on the general idea advocated in this report. sure, but to them I say, boo-hoo, cry me a river. There is plenty of space in this city for those who want to defend the status quo. This report and this event is about making a difference and making sure that in the future it will be easier for those who want to travel safely, sustainably, comfortably, with easy ticketing. Thank you so much. And now I will give the floor to Jon Worth, who I've known for quite a while, who has a lot of experience, both as a railway traveler, crossing every single European border, but also an expert on the policy matter. The floor is yours, Jon.
Right, okay, thank you very much indeed, Jakob, and indeed thank you for commissioning the report, and it's nice to be here in Brussels to be able to present it. As ever, I had an international train journey this morning coming here from Maastricht to come to Brussels to make the presentation, and another one to France coming up this afternoon. So if we can just switch the slides over. What I'm going to do is give a summary of some of what we were trying to do with the report. You can find printed editions of the report around here in the room, and there are different web versions as well, a HTML version and some PDFs you can follow on the links which you see there on the screen, and that will be up later on if it's too fast for you to note it down right away. So what Jakob asked me to do was to kind of take a step back from the everyday Brussels discussion about MDMS and to try to look at this issue more kind of holistically and overall Europe-wide. So take a step back from this and say, okay, out from your introduction there, Jakob, just a moment ago, when a new European Commission should look at this again from some point this autumn, ideally, what should be the things that should be on their agenda to look at? It was not aiming to say, this is how far we think the debate got in this term. So it's taking a step back to kind of look forward. And to do that, I tried to then come up with some kind of schema, some kind of model in order to manage to be able to help us digest some of the difficulties and some of the problems implicit within this debate and discussion. And to make a multimodal trip work correctly, there are those four elements that you can see up on the screen here: trip planning, trip purchase. Those are the two that basically, Jakob, you mentioned most importantly in your introduction. Disruption information, so something gone wrong and I need to replan what I'm going to have to do about that. And then afterwards, if I actually need some compensation, or maybe I've needed a night in a hotel or something like that along my route, how do I manage to get passenger rights at the end of that trip? So the report tries to digest each of those four components and try to assess, where do we have a legal framework which is adequate, but we need better implementation of the existing legal framework? Or where do we actually need a new legal framework in order to manage to put the problems right? Now, Pillars 1 and 3, trip planning and disruption information, we do actually have, supposedly at least, a legal framework at the moment which allows that to be done. If you look at the work that's been done, and it's cited in the report done, for example, by the Technical University of Darmstadt, they've managed to actually build a multimodal travel planner that works better for at least the trip planning component using data which is available already than is the case for actually some public transport authorities. Their argument, and I've spoken to them for the writing of the report, is actually some national railway operators in particular are not very forthcoming with that data, and you might actually need some legal cases to get them to part with more of the data, but at least their argument was the legal framework is in place. The same for disruption information. If your train is disrupted in Belgium and you're actually trying to check that in a German app, you can actually find that at the moment because there is at least a relationship between those railway companies. So for Pillars 1 and Pillar 3, we are talking about mostly about an issue of missing implementation or data gaps. The legal framework is largely in place. For points 2 and point 4, trip purchase and passenger rights, we're also lacking the legal framework. Now, let's nail this right up at the beginning. If we leave these problems to railway companies themselves, they will not fix it. They have not fixed it until now, and I do not believe a word which is said by the Community of European Railways with their ticketing roadmap. It's also a bit ironic that it's a roadmap rather than a railway map. They will actually fix this issue of their own accord by 2025. We have been waiting for years already. And indeed, actually, that is therefore the most crucial point. You are only going to fix this for passengers with a new legal framework to oblige ticket reselling. And I'll come to that when we come to some of the examples in just a minute. Now, what we wanted very centrally in this report were concrete case studies, things that real passengers face, that highlight exactly these difficulties and these problems. So these are born, some of them out of my own personal experience crossing lots of borders by train, others with consultations of various people, because I'm not a big person for traveling by bus, and we had to include some bus examples in addition. Anyway, so I'm going to talk through these cases which highlight the difficulties that are central and are very, very important that we need to face and we need to overcome. So the first is if you take a train from Paris to Milano, you can't actually do that at the moment because the track is blocked by a landslide, but let's leave that to one side at the moment. When the landslide is sorted out and the trains run again, the ticketing problem is unfortunately going to remain. There are two operators of trains on the Paris to Milano route. They are SNCF and Trenitalia, so two state-owned operators that are operating onto each other's networks. Now, if you go to the SNCF booking platform, SNCF Connect, you will find only the French trains. If you go to Trenitalia's website, you will find only the Italian trains. However, if you go to websites like Trainline or Omeo, you will find both operators. And interestingly, if you go to the website of Deutsche Bahn or even the Dutch railways, their international portal NS International, you will find both. Now, this basically, and indeed, before there was competition on this route between Trenitalia and SNCF, SNCF would happily sell you Trenitalia tickets. They now no longer will. Now, there is no technical barrier or difficulty here to SNCF selling Trenitalia tickets or Trenitalia selling SNCF tickets. They simply do not want to. Now, if you are a French consumer and you are used to booking tickets on the SNCF website, you might actually just assume that there is only SNCF that is running on that route. And likewise, if you're an Italian consumer that is using Trenitalia. So this idea that if you just leave it to the state-run railways, that they will solve these booking problems, well, the Paris to Milan case demonstrates no, they won't. And indeed, actually, if you are a state-run railway somewhere else, like Deutsche Bahn, you can happily sell actually the tickets for operators on a route like this one. There are many other cases similar to this at other borders, anyway, but this is the most pressing one, and that's why that one went into the report. So that's case study number one. Case study number two is what happens if you want to combine plane tickets and train tickets. So if you wanted to go from Brussels to Gdansk in Poland, there are no direct flights on a normal basis between Brussels and Gdansk. There are ways and means of doing that. You can fly from Brussels to Munich and from Munich to Gdansk, or you can fly from Brussels to Warsaw and Warsaw to Gdansk. It's also slightly surprising to me that there are even still flights on such a short route from Warsaw to Gdansk, but there are. Now, the actually efficient route would be actually to fly from Brussels to Warsaw and then hop on a train from Warsaw to Gdansk. But nevertheless, that is something that, as a result of the lack of data, because PKP Intercity, the operator of the trains on the route from Warsaw to Gdansk, is one of the laggards with regard to data sharing with third parties. So even the likes of Trainline, for example, cannot, or Omeo as a multimodal platform, could not sell you that connection even if they wanted to at the moment due to the lack of reselling of Polish intercity train tickets. Hungary is another European country where pretty much no third-party platform has adequate access to the data for reselling of tickets of a connection such as this. What about best prices? So now we're at the other end of Europe. What if you want to go from the first to the second city of Denmark, from Copenhagen to Aarhus? If you go on the website of DSB, Danish State Railways, so they have what are called DSB Orange. It's like the kind of super cheap ticket that off-peak, you have to take the individual nominated train and you can travel for a super cheap price. So this is one example that we found for the report, which offered us a price of 258 Danish crowns, so about 35 euros for that connection. Now, we scoured every other platform going, and the cheapest we could find anywhere else was 56.40 euro. And then actually finding out the reasons for this, as I understand it, both Rail Europe and SNCB actually have a historic arrangement with Danish State Railways, and that no ticketing platform even has API access to DSB ticketing offers. Now, this is basically a state railway company refusing to pass on its cheapest tickets to third-party platforms, or indeed, even if you book this route, even with Deutsche Bahn, they cannot give you the 35 euro price for that one. Now, you may be aware that the European Commission has investigated Spanish state railway Renfe for exactly this sort of behavior, not passing on their cheapest ticketing prices to third-party platforms, including Trainline. Now, in the research for this report, we found exactly the same behavior of the Danish state railways, the Belgian state railways, and the Dutch state railways. Now, there may be others that we haven't yet found, but we found at least 3 national cases of the cheapest tickets not being available anywhere other than the ticketing portal of the state railway themselves. So if you want the best price, you need to be a very savvy consumer in this current environment. Now, another one, not too dissimilar. What happens if a train crosses multiple countries, and how do you get the best price for that on just the same train? So the most absurd example is a very nice train. I can highly recommend it if you've never taken it. The Railjet train that goes from Munich to Budapest. So no criticism whatsoever, very comfortable, reliable service. But if you try and go from Munich to Budapest, you can book the tickets from 3 different operators, because the train is run in partnership between Deutsche Bahn, Austrian Railways, ÖBB, and Hungarian MAV. So if you try for the date that we took, January 2024, you could find a ticket for the first departure of the day of 49 euros from Deutsche Bahn. On the same train, if you book with Austrian Railways, it was 101 euros. And if you went to the website of MAV, you could get the very same class, same ticket conditions for 37 euros. Right now, the difficulty here also is if you are someone else, you are Trainline or Omeo, or indeed you're the Dutch state railways and you want to sell a ticket for this, is you cannot actually get that cheapest price because MAV will not share their data with you. You could at least offer the 49 euros price which Deutsche Bahn is offering there. So any place where there are contingents of tickets split between operators. It's the same on TGV trains between France and Germany, for example. If you query the website on the right side of the border, you may end up with a ticket that's cheaper than if you book from the ticketing platform on the other side. What about real-time data? So when I'm running, I've got my ticket booked, is my train going to be on time, or maybe is it going to be cancelled or not? So let's take an example of crossing Germany, just a simple national route from Frankfurt to Hamburg. If I go to the website of German Railways, it will tell me, is my train going to be departing on time? And even what the reason is, you can see that on the screen, it's a bit small. It says police activity for this particular delay on Deutsche Bahn's connection there. However, even if I've booked my ticket with a multimodal platform, I cannot at the moment still get data on the live running of my train on a platform like Trainline or Omeo. As I understand it, Deutsche Bahn is currently actually talking to these platforms about trying to put this problem right. I was told at Connecting Europe Days a fortnight ago, but so far I haven't been able to find live running information on either Omeo or Trainline's website for German trains. But interestingly, to show that these railway companies are willing to share live running data, you can find the live running data for German trains in Google Maps, but on Google Maps, you can't actually sell the ticket. right? So basically, Deutsche Bahn is using this as a way and means, as I see it, of managing to gather the customer data. So the next time you don't use a third-party platform to book your ticket, you use Deutsche Bahn instead. So ultimately, this idea, which you also hear from some railway lobbyists in Brussels, we don't want to give our live running data to big US corporations. Well, Google? Anyway, so there's a bit of an inconsistency on that point, I think. Right, and then one final one to end, and this is specifically about the passenger rights situation, because unlike MDMS for ticket booking, we do at least have a legislative proposal for multimodal passenger rights. But the problem is what about multi-operator single mode trips? Right, so let me explain the difference. So we're going to take a trip from Royan in France to Halle-Saale in Germany. It might not be a particularly everyday trip that people would make there, but there is a reason why we chose these cities. So if you want to go from Royan to Paris, you have one bus operator and one train operator. They are SNCF for the train, and they are blah, blah bus for the bus, right? And if you want to go from Paris to Halle-Saale, you have one train operator for a direct connection. It's ÖBB's Nightjet. And you have one bus operator, Flixbus. Right now, if you booked Royan to Halle-Saale and something goes wrong, right? So for example, you imagine you start on the bus and you change in Paris onto the train, which would theoretically be possible. Under the current draft of the multimodal passenger rights regulation, you would be covered. If, however, you take a blah blah bus plus a Flixbus, or an SNCF train plus an ÖBB train, you would, under the current draft, have no rights. And as we well know, because of the deficiency of rail passenger rights at the moment, you would actually have no rights under the existing legislation of rail passenger rights either, because those trains are operated by different operators. And you would also not be covered, and this is also a reason why we need law rather than informal agreements between railway companies. The agreement on journey continuation, which is bandied about very strongly by the railway industry, would also not work here because, one, it doesn't give you rights to a night in a hotel in the case that something breaks down. And if you miss a night train, then you're going to need a night in a hotel in Paris in the case of disruption. And second, it only gives you rights to take the next train of the same operator. And the next train in the daytime to get you even to Germany would be run by Deutsche Bahn and not by ÖBB. So ultimately, in this situation, if you're to combine two operators in the same mode, you also need to solve the problem as well as combining two different modes, right? So that's why we chose the case of Royan to Halle-Saale to demonstrate exactly this contradiction, which would have to be ideally then amended by the future Tran Committee in the European Parliament in the next legislative term. So those are the case studies and some of the examples of why we included them. There were many more that didn't make the cut. So if you have a particular question about some other corner of Europe, chances are we probably looked into it. But anyway, those are the kind of quick introduction of what was in the report. Now over to you, Jakob, and to the panel for your kind of comments and questions and feedback.
Thank you so much, Jon. And now I thought I would just notify a few things that I should have mentioned in the very beginning. This hybrid event is also being recorded and will be available for consumption also after the event. So just so you know that the event is being recorded. There will also be a Q&A session after the panel have given their comments on the report and the presentation. But first, now some responses to the report. First, Robin Loos from the Consumer Organization BEUC.
Thank you, and thank you, Jon, for the good presentation. Every time we talk about it, I'm wondering myself, because as consumer organization, we've sometimes, quite often actually, we are presented as dreamers, asking for the impossible, right? Well, I wish I had a bigger dream than that. I wish I would not be defending the right or the possibility to book a cross-border ticket, to book a multimodal ticket, because as you said, Jakob, it was the case before. It was something that was possible under the technology of the day. And why, with so much more technology than we have today, why do we have to fight about it? So it's a personal reflection, but I really wish I had a bigger dream than that. But that also says a lot about this file under the current political developments and the upcoming European elections. We are at the time where the Green Deal is under a lot of stress, where we know the next mandate will not focus on green policies. And here we have a perfect example of a reality check. You want people to opt in on the Green Deal policies? There's one. Make them a simple solution, like calling your friend from Belgium to Germany at no cost was at the time. This is a very pragmatic solution to promote Green Deal policies that work for people. And this is why I think here we have an argument to make. And I think Jon does that perfectly in the examples, and we're trying to do it as well. This is realism. On the contrary, some railway operators will tell you that we need 100 billion euros of new high-speed lanes to connect all European capitals by 2030, 2050. Well, I'm telling you, we won't have much money. This solution is a no-cost solution or almost no-cost solution for policymakers with great advantages. So what it requires actually is political ownership. And the next European Commission needs to step up, address the facts, and solve the problems that have been identified. We know we need some regulatory intervention here. And railways will tell you that by 2025, should we adopt the right standard, we will solve it. It's May 2024. How in realistic terms will that happen? It won't. It simply won't. And it's been the case for 12 years, so it won't. So there is no point of saying, let's wait for what's coming from a private initiative, because that simply will not be the time of a regulatory intervention for which the job and the preparatory job has been done. So everything is there on the table. We know the options that are possible, and this is what we advocate for. This is also, in the time of these upcoming elections, a time to reflect on the single market, what it means for people, what it could bring. We had this Enrico Letta report, which also mentioned, by the way, the need for regulatory intervention. This is also a very economic policy. If you don't like the green one, it's a very economic policy to promote. And so just to complement on Jon's report, we've tried to do a similar one with our members across Europe, all consumer organizations, where we also pointed out the passenger rights issues, the connections issues, also stuff that work pretty well, because in some countries we have to admit that, especially in Germany's S-Bahn system, it works pretty well. You can take a train almost all day throughout the day at regular intervals. And so what we've done in this report is also to map out the good solutions that are being promoted. And because I've said we need this political ownership, we address that into a master plan for rail that the next European Commission should set out. Starting with the quick fixes, MDMS. Passenger rights, I would not call it the quick fixes because the proposal itself is weak. So it's something that needs to be redone. Other quick fixes would be the coordination of timetables. We have the data. We need to now put that in practice. But during the next mandate, the Commission can do a lot with little means to prepare what I think is also a matter of emergency, is the investments in rail that will require money, but we need to prepare the ground for that. We just shouldn't pour money into a system that is not efficient, right? In there, I think related to the example, the 4 pillars that Jon mentioned, what we actually need for consumers is a global EU-wide free insurance policy, which means I have the insurance whenever I step on a train that I will get to my destination, or that I will get information if something goes wrong, because something can go wrong, that I can book a ticket, that I have passenger rights, whatever mode I take, that at least I have these basic rights protected, as you do when you take the plane. And this global insurance policy doesn't require investments. It's setting up the rules that all players must respect. And for that insurance policy to work, we also need a COP, because all regulatory information, and you talk to consumer organizations who do a lot of implementation case and enforcement cases, you need a COP, and that COP could well be the European Railway Agency, with more power, more financial and human resource to check what's going on, to enforce the data requirements that we have today. And if you prepare all that, Then in 2027, or a bit earlier, of course, when we're going to talk big money for the new multi-annual financial framework, then you can say, yes, let's invest in rail. Let's build up new lines. Let's finish 10T by 2030, hopefully. Let's pour the money because the system has been made up in a way that benefit consumers as it is today. So we can only improve it. So that would be our call as consumer groups. There's much that can be done quite quickly. And then I would be hand in hand with railway operators to say, let's pour money in this network. Let's shift people from cars and planes to rail. And an EU master plan on rail should be just that, preparing the ground for the next MFF or multi-annual financial framework. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin. Next panelist is Chiara Tomasi, Government Relations for Trainline.
Thank you, Jakob. Hi, everyone. I think most of you will know Trainline, but just to give you a clear sense of where we sit, we actually sit across all those 4 pillars that Jon presented earlier. So we will help you plan and purchase your trip, but we'll also follow you then during and after. So we'll try to deal with disruptions and help you navigate your passenger ride. So we really fit across the ticketing, the multimodal digital mobility platforms area. Ticketing is our business, and the first thing I want to say is that we agree that ticketing needs to be fixed. Our industry is already doing quite a lot in making tickets available more easily. We make a lot of cross-border, multimodal, multi-operator journeys available. So our mere existence is already something that is making ticketing easier. However, we cannot do this alone. We are struggling. We still face a lot of barriers in Europe. And therefore, we fully agree with the report's conclusions and with everybody else's conclusions that we need strong regulatory intervention. We're definitely not alone. I think the point is correct. This panel will be quite in agreement on this point, most likely. And I don't think that's a problem. I think it actually shows how much of a broad support there is for action in this space. There really isn't a lot of people that disagree that this should be done. We've seen the letter report. We've seen the Belgian presidency declaration. We've seen multiple competition cases opened and hopefully closed.
They say that they don't hear the mic. Could you try with the other one? See if that's.
Let's say if this is better.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's quite broad support and there's very little disagreement on this topic. I'll just, it's okay. You can do it without seeing me, I think. So the question is then, how do we fix ticketing? We agree, actually, we don't think that this is a groundbreaking, gigantic intervention that is needed. There's a very targeted, relatively simple, relatively small thing that Europe can do, and is introduce legislation. MDMS was obviously the one we were waiting for and hoping for. Now, what shape it takes in the next commission, we'll see. As long as it addresses the issues, I think we'll be happy to see any type of regulatory intervention, but we absolutely need something to happen. And in terms of what needs to be within that package, we actually fully agree with what's in the report in terms of its recommendations. But I do want to stress one item, I think, as the only industry representative of the panel. For us, one of the most important things that regulatory intervention can do is to ensure that there are fair commercial conditions in the market for players like us, for players that sell tickets as intermediaries. Access to data is something that comes up a lot, and it's very important. However, it is not enough. If our industry cannot have a viable business, if we cannot conduct our business in a way that allows us to survive, we just will disappear. And so we'll end up with only operators leading on the ticketing front. What I mean is, we're not asking for sort of artificial commission levels or subsidies or government intervention to solve a commercial problem for us. We just need to be on a fair playing field, on a level playing field with the operators. You know, especially on the rail side, we're dealing with often very large national champions who have a dominant position in the market, who are able to abuse it to a certain extent. So really what we need is legislation that prevents them from abusing their position in that way. And once we have that, we'll figure it out. We'll negotiate our way into a viable business, into fair remuneration, into commission levels that allow us to invest and grow and do more for our passengers and for our customers. We've mentioned, I think, multiple times the FRIEND principles. fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. For us, this is really a key piece of any intervention. This has to be in there because it's really core to keeping us alive and healthy and present, and allowing us to invest more money and resources and energy into going, for example, into better services for passengers and passenger rights, and expanding into new countries, and making sure that we continue to bring the single market together. Again, we really don't think this is a groundbreaking demand. We think it's pretty achievable. We hope the next commission is ambitious and goes for it. They really have to go for it, though. Coming out with something that is sort of half there. We've seen some options around relinking. We've heard about maybe doing just data access. We don't think that's going to really remove the barriers. We think it's just going to allow the status quo to continue. So we do hope to see ambition from the next commission, and for sure you'll hear me say this more and more in the next few months when the new round of MEPs and commission officials come after the elections. But I think this group will continue to advocate for it in the long run.
Thank you so much, Chiara. And before I give the word to Victor, I could just stress that if you, when you speak, you have to use the button that is closer to yourself to make sure that this works correctly. So now, Victor from TNE.
Okay, so I'm Victor Thévenet from Transport Environment. So we are the transport NGO active in Brussels, but also in 6 other countries. So for those who don't know us, basically our aim is to decarbonize transport as soon as possible. So in my speech, I will try to explain why we think MDMS and an ambitious MDMS text is important to decarbonize transport. But first of all, thank you very much, Jon, for drafting this report, because I think it's very comprehensive and the case studies are particularly useful. And I think that would be a great report to present to the newly elected MEP of the Tran Committee and also the next Transport Commissioner, because I think that's one of the key. We need a good Transport Commissioner, and we need to talk to this person to set an agenda early 2025 to have this proposal back on the table. Because of course we were really disappointed. It didn't happen in this mandate. Not a lot of things have happened on rail within this mandate compared to a lot of regulation on aviation, on cars, on ships. So we really need to have a more ambitious policy agenda in the next mandate. And why we think it's important to decarbonize transport to improve the ticketing. So just to give a bit the bigger picture, since 1990, the emission of the non-transport sector have decreased by 38%, but the emission of the transport sector have increased by 25%, which means that the share of the transport in the total emission of the EU has almost doubled since 1990. So and on top of that, we now have an objective to decarbonize by 90% by 2040. So there is really an urgency to decarbonize transport, which is becoming actually the main issue of the climate policy. And on that, we need to go fast. So the rail sector has multiple issues in order that it get better. So issues that are difficult, infrastructure. It's a lot of investment. It takes a lot of time to build the infrastructure, but there are other topics that can be tackled quite fast. And one of these topics is ticketing, why we are here today. It's an easy, it's a quick fix. It's a low-hanging fruit, as we say, because you just need to regulate. You don't need too much money. And this can actually simplify and allow people to travel more by train or bus, so more sustainable mode of transport. So we definitely ask the Commission to regulate this sector and choose the reselling options that we think is the only suitable options to bring the benefits to the consumer when traveling. And why is it so important to do that? It's because, for example, if we look at the emission from aviation, actually, when 2/3 of the emission from aviation are international flights, 2/3. So, and then you also have to add flights to some islands in Europe, also some long distance flights that cannot be shifted to rail or bus, actually. So it means that to decarbonize aviation sector and also sometimes road sector, we will not only need people to shift the way they travel, so from plane to rail, they will also need to do a destination shift. They will need to not anymore, for example, travel that much to Mallorca, but actually maybe go more to the lake region in northern Italy. And so that means that's like a change of behavior that is difficult. It's not only changing the mode of transport, it's also changing the destination you will travel to. So that's why we need to make it as easy as possible for them. We really need for them that it's really that there are no barriers. And that's why the resealing option is the most suitable option for them to have a seamless experience while traveling cross-border. And so that's, and so for the next commission, so I also liked in the report the fact that you insisted on that it's often an issue of multi-operator and not multimodal. And for the rail sector, it's very true. And if the proposal of the Commission was rejected by the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, I understand it's because they were not convinced that the proposal will improve multimodality. So I'm thinking that maybe for the next proposal, it should maybe have a bigger focus on the multi-operator side, because I believe it's maybe where there is actually more potential. And this wasn't really in the present proposal, and hopefully it will go past the Regulatory Scrutiny Board this time. So we'll of course continue talking about this topic. We need to talk about it to the next commission, next transport commissioner, and the next MEP. Voilà, thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And now our final panelist, Delphine Gransart, Senior Researcher at European Passengers Federation. And did you, by the way, switch the button?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John, for drafting the report, and thanks, Jakob, for commissioning it and for also organizing this event. Also for us, for EPF, it's of course a topic that we've been working on a lot and defending the last years already. Unfortunately, so far with no proposal, but we are hopeful for the next commission along with the colleagues here. So looking at the report, we agree with the conclusion. I think it's in line with all of our experiences. If we try to book international rail journeys, we encounter such issues as described in the report. Currently planning, booking, and also executing multi-operator or multimodal journeys is really difficult. It's time consuming to organize. And it's just difficult to get the information, to find out what options are available, what the price is, then to buy a ticket. So yeah, there's a lot of barriers. I also like the approach in the sense that you consider really the problems from a passenger perspective. You look at, first you need to plan your journey, buy a ticket, and then what happens if something goes wrong? So indeed, these are the three main barriers. So what do we need? First of all, to be able to choose rail or multimodal or multi-operator options, we need to know what options are available. And that's the first barrier, because sometimes this information is not available. You have to look, you have to already have some really high level of pre-knowledge to be able to do this. And then the next step is actually to buy a ticket. Often also you still have to go to separate websites or apps or channels to buy each leg of the journey separately. That's not easy, and it also comes with risks because you're not protected if something goes wrong. Sometimes you don't even have the real-time information, let alone that you will have the guarantee that you will reach your final destination, at least not without incurring significant additional costs. So for us as well, MDMS is really necessary. Legislative action on MDMS would really be needed, because data sharing and this readiness to conclude distribution agreements with each other, with MDMS, with other operators, is necessary to facilitate journey planning and purchasing tickets for passengers. This was already identified as an important topic, and this is smart and sustainable mobility strategy. It was also included in the action plan. But yeah, we're still awaiting the concrete proposals as said. In the report, Jon, you mentioned that indeed data sharing is addressed to a certain extent. It's true, but indeed implementation is still lacking in some aspects. But we can start from there. But indeed, on really the purchasing part and the passenger protection, we do need legislative action. We have the multimodal passenger rights proposal, which is a start. Indeed, it has to be also multi-operator, even if these operators are the same modes. That's an important thing to note. And also, it needs to go further, because right now we have basic passenger rights introduced for single tickets, but that's actually a very small share right now of the total amount of tickets sold. So we would also like to see this expanded to combined tickets. So tickets that you buy in a one-stop shop, but that are not explicitly advertised as being a single ticket, because that's what you expect. If you pay in one amount for your ticket, and you will expect that you will have some kind of guarantee to arrive at your destination. And I think for rail as well, for the rail operators, it's also necessary to really realize the ambition and their potential role as the backbone of our sustainable mobility system, because currently it's just too difficult, and people, even if they want to travel with rail, they drop out. It's confirmed by personal experiences, but also by research. The dropout rate for booking rail journeys is 10 times higher than booking by air, shown by ING research. So that should, trigger some action also just for their own benefit of the rail operators. And then, we could add a lot of extra case studies as well to the report. So price indeed is really an important thing. Not being able to see the most advantageous tariffs. Discounts are also not available. But even within one country, I hear that SNCF, for example, tends to push the TGV options, whereas sometimes the example given by our members was not to Bordeaux, that actually intercities are cheaper, of course, but also faster. But so even there's actually already an issue. And such options apparently are shown on Deutsche Bahn, but not on SNCF Connect. So that's strange, but also within one company and its subsidiaries, there might be some work to do. Not all data is shared. Sometimes there's additional fees asked just to cross the border. At least there's many things. There's also different booking horizons from different companies, making it difficult to combine tickets. Also, you think, oh, this is not available, but actually it is. You're just too early or too late, sold out. So, I mean, there's so many different issues. Also, interchange times, that's also a thing to consider. If you need to book your own ticket, you have to count on longer transfer times just to be sure, which increases the travel time a lot. Whereas actually there are already some initiatives in place, like the agreement on journey continuation with CRCIT, but passengers don't know about it. So hopefully that will change, because it's a start again. So a lot of barriers, and we count on the Commission, along with the colleagues here, to really to take action. And we also count on the rail operators to work along, because it's also to their benefit to have people switching to rail and not, choosing another option because it's just not convenient enough, not affordable enough. Voilà, that's it.
Thank you so much, Delphine. And just to comment on that final note from the operator perspective, when I talk to most railway operators, they tell me that the domestic transport is roughly 90 or 95% of the business, and cross-border is only a small portion for them. And so they sort of self-perceive that all these things that we are talking about here is sort of irrelevant for them. because it's a small portion of the traffic. But as we know, in order for the green transition to effectively work, yes, there might be electric aviation sometime in the future, but that's decades away, even from the enthusiast perspective on electric aviation. It's still decades away. So the best way to short-term reduce our emissions from the transport sector is changing of modality. And from that perspective, I really wish that the railway companies would see that opportunity in growing the cake, growing the opportunities of business, and I would wish for less focusing on the profit margins that are available if you're not exposed to competition. Now we will open up the floor for questions and interventions, and I will have the help of Linnea, my advisor, to collect those who want to ask questions. But before you get the opportunity, I will actually ask Jon to give some reflections on the interventions by the panel.
Right, thank you. A few small reflections. The first is, why was it possible before and why is it no longer possible? I think it's important that we deal with that. I often get this as kind of, it was always better before in railways, right? And we've got to move away from that, because ultimately it was easy to calculate a ticket price if it was a number of kilometers priced by the price per kilometer. Now, the difficulty we have is tickets which vary in price by time of day that you travel. So it's not just simply a function of how many kilometers that you're traveling. Now, if each railway company has its Deutsche Bahn Sparpreis or SNCF having similar types of ticket prices for its TGVs, trying to combine those is where it starts getting very complicated. Now, that's ultimately then to bridge the gap between what Delphine said and I think what Robin said, is ultimately you cannot oblige railway companies to sell those connections in one single ticket. That's why you need some kind of, if I'm stuck, a kind of guarantee type of solution, right? Rather than obliging railway companies to be able to sell what has traditionally been called a through ticket. If, and out of bitter experience traveling Europe-wide by train, just simply the IT infrastructure of many state railways would never be able to cope with even selling national tickets with a good IT process, whether I really would not like to oblige the Portuguese railways to be able to sell me a ticket the whole way to Berlin. So I think that is a way of a dead end of solving it that way. We need some kind of delay guarantee type system as a way forward in that regard. The point about booking horizons and delay and reduction cards is very, very important as well, and ought to also be covered by MDMS. The differences and the headaches I have Europe-wide, Poland and Sweden being the biggest culprits with booking horizons, are very, very difficult. I'm having to take a damn ferry to get to Malmö rather than a train in May as a result of those headaches. And so I think there's an important point here as well. I was asked at Connecting Europe Days a few weeks ago, what would be the first thing I would say to a new European Commissioner for Transport? Well, actually, I'd like to take a new European Commissioner for Transport to some of those places on the ground and see what actually happens, right? I was in Maastricht yesterday, right? We had the debate about among the Spitzenkandidaten for the Commission presidency, yeah. But the train from Liège to Maastricht was grim. It was dirty and covered in graffiti. Now, it would be kind of handy if Ursula von der Leyen had been obliged to take that train in order to manage to get to the Maastricht debate. So what we on this panel managed to do is we've gathered that practical experience, but like bottling that up and bringing that to the Commission would be, and I don't mean Commission officials, I mean the future commissioner, I think would be very useful in addition. And just one final point on Delphine's point together with Jakob's. I hear more or less from some in the railway industry, why do we need to put this right? Because our international trains are already full, right? Which is true, right? Because basically, if you only run 2 trains a day between Paris and Barcelona, right, and there is enough demand for green transport, those trains will indeed be full, right? Now, how are we so negative with regard to our international rail transport that we can't actually see if we make it easier to book, we'll get more passengers onto trains, we can run more trains, and actually see that in a positive cycle? Now, that kind of way and means of seeing that positively, and then I've got enormous time for those railway companies like Train Italia, for example, or České dráhy, who do think a bit like that, right? We'll improve our ticketing and we'll improve our offer, but that type of attitude in international rail, unfortunately, in my experience, is still among companies still a little bit too rare.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions or interventions from the room or online? If so, not so yet, I have a question for Trainline, for Chiara. Could you comment a bit on the issue of pricing and maybe a comparison for the aviation sector? I understand that there has been some trouble with Lufthansa, for example, where they tried to make it easier or cheaper to buy tickets from Lufthansa themselves, but then there was legal intervention against them. How would you compare for a future legal framework for the railway sector on the pricing issue? And maybe if you could compare to the legal framework in the UK, which is to some extent not in the general sense. I wouldn't say that UK is a good example on the railway in general, but in this perspective, in my view, the UK is a good example.
I'd say pricing goes into the data access category. So when our side calls for full data access, prices is one of the data points that we're asking for access to. So at the moment, generally speaking, the way our business works is that we will take the live price from the operator and offer that price to the customer. We don't apply discounts necessarily. We don't sort of buy in advance. We just will give you the same price you will find on the operator's website at the moment. You will find on Trainline as well. In some cases, we don't have access to all the prices. We don't have access, especially to some of the special fares, some of the discounts. In some countries, for example, we don't have access to the lower fare that are assigned to people with reduced mobility. So that's where the pricing question comes in for us. Do we have access to the full range of prices or not? And whether we have that access is fully dependent on whether the operator has decided to give us that access. We see this as just, as I mentioned, as a data question. So when we talk about we need access to data, sure, we need access to what time does the train leave and where is it stuck and what reason is it stuck for. But data also means prices and fares and features, and can you bring your bike, and can you book your seat, and can you book your lunch, and anything around your experience on the train, including prices. The way this works in the UK is that that data is accessible. So it's just bundled together in a centralized place. We get it from there. Everybody gets it from there. Everybody has the same information and uses it in the way that they see fit based on sort of agreements with the carrier. So it's fully accessible, and there is no discrepancy between what you'll find on an intermediary and what you'll find on the operators themselves, which I think is what we should all aim for.
Thank you. A question for Victor. I think it's quite fascinating that over this term, sorry? Okay. I think it's fascinating over this term that we've taken some at least relatively ambitious decisions on carbon pricing for aviation, for the road sector, even though as a Green, I would have liked to gone quite a lot further, but at least we've taken some decisions. And they have some political and social implications in that ordinary people will have to pay a higher price for those tickets. But it's so striking that we don't have the political ability to do sort of the reverse, but for the railway, making that easier and cheaper, which I think would make sense to do that hand in hand. And it's striking to me that carbon pricing for shipping, for aviation and the road sector is politically easier to do than solving the ticketing issue for the railways. I can't understand why that is. So from your perspective, as an advocacy NGO, what's your perspective?
And we totally share what you say, that rail has been sort of disregarded. I mean, initially there was a plan. There was an action plan to boost long-distance passenger transport, and there are some ideas in it it was supposed to have some guidelines on truck access charges, so to reduce the truck access charges, so then we could have cheaper rail. There was supposed to be a study also on exemption of VAT for international train. It also didn't happen. So, and there was supposed to have the NDMS regulation, which also didn't happen. So we totally share this point of view, and that it's a shame. The reason why, I mean, I don't have like a specific answer. I'm also asking the Commission why nothing has happened in this sector. my take is that it's really strongly linked to the rail monopolies that are pushing against anything, if any changes in the sector. So I think that's the main reason, and that's what we need to continue pushing in this direction, and push for a policy agenda at the European Union level. I also think it's also maybe a EU bubble issue in the fact that many people at the Commission actually don't know so much the situation at cross-border level, because it's they are not really so linked to cross-border international borders by rail. So there is a need of pedagogy and to explain and to show, and I think the work of Jon is great in this direction, because yeah, it seems like they don't know so much what's happening on the ground.
I actually share that experience quite a lot, that most people here in the Brussels bubble are not even aware of the problem as it is. Same thing with political colleagues in my own member state in Sweden. Since most people who travel by rail do so within a member state, and then it's obviously quite easy to book that ticket within a member state. And it's actually quite few of us who often take cross-border journeys with multiple operators. And being a Swede who try not to fly, I take the train about once a month between Stockholm and Brussels with 3 operators. First, either Snälltåget or SJ with the night train from Stockholm to Hamburg, and then Deutsche Bahn from Hamburg to Köln, and then either Deutsche Bahn or Eurostar from Köln to Brussels. And since the European Parliament's own traveling agency don't have the capability of assisting me with that, I actually have to book it myself. It's actually so frustrating. A bit of a side comment that if you fly between Stockholm and Brussels, it's easy for the European Parliament's traveling agency to book that ticket for you, and you don't even have to put up the money yourself. They just book it for you. You don't have to expense that yourself. But personally, since I take the train, I have to book that myself, and I have to expense it myself, and actually can take up to a year to get reimbursed by the Parliament. So really disincentivizing us, and of course I am materially well off, so it's not that big a problem for me personally, but still, for the people working here in the Parliament who do want to travel sustainably, they do have to fork out that money themselves and get it expensed, which can take quite a while. And I hear so many stories from people who work in an authority or at a big company which have a traveling agency, who share the same story. But if they want to travel by aviation, the traveling agency just books it for them. But it's a big headache if they want to travel by railway, which of course creates a situation where most decision makers are not even aware of the problem from the get-go. And as within psychology and in policy making, realizing the problem is the first step of trying to solve it. Yes, Chiara.
I just wanted to make one point on the cross-border side of it. I think cross-border is where some of the value of the easier ticketing we've talked about today is the most obvious. But there's no reason why all of these benefits shouldn't be pursued for national travel as well. So the things we've talked about today, easier to find the tickets, the same price everywhere, the cheapest price available on all vendors, being able to compare, being able to see multimodal options, all of that still is valued for the national travel as well. And so that I think it's useful we talk about cross-border because it kind of sells a bit of a dream, but all of what we talked about today also applies to national travel, and there's no reason why we should limit ourselves to the cross-border side of things, I'd say.
Thank you so much. A question for Jon that we didn't spend so much time on, only touched it a little bit, is on the issue of FRAND, which is something that we looked into the report. Could you give us some insights on the pros and cons of various ways of handling the FRAND issue? Thank you.
I suspect that others on the panel know more about FRAND than I do, to be honest. But overall, I think the important point is ultimately this. unfair terms are being used by some incumbent railway operators as a way and means of preventing the development of third-party platforms. So rather than saying we're not going to give any data for resellers at all, which only a handful of railway companies now do, right? There are many that will offer reselling opportunities, but at terms which are so bad that no platform can actually make any money out of that reselling. And it's not only digital platforms, it's traditional office on the street travel agencies that can't make any money out of that either. Now, what's very, very important as well is to not forget that railway companies will give a commission to each other if they sell each other's tickets, right? So when Deutsche Bahn sells a Train Italia ticket, it is not that Deutsche Bahn is doing that as a charity, right? It will take a cut from that sale. So this idea that essentially that somehow it is the likes of Trainline or Omeo that are somehow creaming this off. Well, actually, other railway companies are doing that in relations with each other as well. So ultimately, what is very important, and also let's set this into a kind of a wider context as well. There was an ethical point in the report and in discussion, particularly with Linnea, we've fought it back and forth about how to incorporate this. And my own point of view, and I think it's pretty much your point of view as well, Jakob, is we don't mind ultimately who would offer those ticket sales, right? Whether that is a platform, the light train line that doesn't itself run trains, or whether it is SE or Deutsche Bahn that's selling those train tickets, we are fine with either of those options. What is most important is that if you're a railway operator, the data is made available to third parties to mean however many tools there are that can offer those booking platforms, we are fine with multiple tools being able to do so. But that therefore is crucial that those terms have to be reasonable and fair. Now, and as I understand it, although others on the panel may have more details about that, exactly how to determine that in the MDMS regulation was not fully hammered out, right? And so that's got to be something where the principle is clear, but the detail of how you'd actually, and also a watchdog to keep an eye on that, we need to be careful on that point. One final point as well on with regard to price, right? And on a separate point on the previous discussion. There is an example of where everything goes wrong in European rail, which is one which bureaucrats in Brussels take very often. It is the Eurostar from Brussels to Paris. It shows all of the dysfunction and all of the problems and all of the joys of European rail. It's actually comparatively easy to book, given that, But the difficulty is so I split my time between Germany and France. It takes me 7 hours to get here from Berlin, and it takes me 4 hours from Bourgogne, but it costs me twice as much to get here from Bourgogne in France as if I come from Germany, because of the chronically high price of the Eurostar train from Paris to Brussels. Why is it so damned expensive? Because it is the worst of both worlds. It operates like a monopoly. It has not increased its capacity in more than 20 years, but because it's that international service, they can charge a premium price for it. It uses 75% the same tracks as the TGV that goes from Paris to Lille. But if the TGV that went from Paris to Lille were that expensive, it will be a political scandal in France. And so therefore, that train has what would essentially be a remnant of public service to keep a lid on the ticket prices. But of course, you haven't got competition against Eurostar either, or at least you haven't on the rails, right? Now, it's one of the most driven Flixbus routes in Europe is Brussels to Paris. It takes 4 hours, but actually, if you're on a budget, it's basically the only way of managing to make the trip. So you've got the worst of state monopoly behavior, right, in terms of keeping competition out, but you've got the worst of private sector capitalism in terms of setting the prices. And so that ultimately, it is the most frustrating, one of the most frustrating routes of all is Brussels to Paris in that regard. So either let's have some public service and put a lid on the prices and boost the capacity, which is what, for example, the Swiss railways would do if they were running a route like that, or let's have some competition, Italian style, to drive down the prices. But at the moment, on the Brussels-Paris route, out of bitter experience, we've got the worst of both worlds from a passenger point of view.
And on that topic, on the worst of both worlds, I think it's important to stress one of the differences of the changes that's been made over the past 2 decades is that many railway operators in Europe, also in Sweden, has had a change in what is the assignment from the owner. It used to be that they had a societal mission, that the point of the publicly owned company is to provide a certain service, regardless of the profits to the owner. And after that was changed, even though the company is publicly owned, it operates by a profit motive. And then you really get the worst of both worlds. So from my opinion, it really makes more sense. So if the company is supposed to be publicly owned, then there needs to be a challenge on what is the profit motive. Or you have, or the situation would be more private companies, but then you need competition, because a profit motive with no competition is not a recipe for good customer experience. And now we have some questions from online. First from Alexander Tesmet. A question from my side as well. How would we manage to make MDMS work for citizens of the European Union living in peripheral areas of the European Union, for example, north of Sweden? Many people would like to travel more sustainably, but wouldn't it sometimes be more difficult for persons living in peripheral areas to do so?
So having traveled to northern Sweden and having fought exactly these difficulties in managing to get my way to Haparanda, I think ultimately the problems, well, first of all, if the trip time is simply too long, you can't put that right with MDMS and with data, right? So ultimately, that is ultimately going to be a limit. But you've got in sparsely populated regions, you have a multimodal ticketing challenge, which is you're going to have to combine buses and trains. And also another point, which is vitally important, is you need a solid booking horizon. Because if you are actually taking the once a day train that might run somewhere from a small village in northern Sweden to Stockholm, for example, you need to know reliably some months ahead when it will run or not. So ultimately, rights and data to combine buses and trains and a reliable booking horizon, and that also then means well-planned engineering work so the railway operators know when the trains will and will not run. Those components should also be able to help those people in peripheral regions as well, would be my argument. We can't with MDMS put all of those problems right, however, apologies to that the person asking that question.
Thank you so much. Another question from online from Oliver Levy. Rail operators such as Eurostar, whose competitors are budget airlines, fix prices according to demand and are accordingly usually expensive. Could and would Eurostar change this model to sell more affordable tickets whilst remaining competitive?
My argument to that, I'm going researching about Eurostar, but Channel Tunnel Eurostar this afternoon, actually. Why would Eurostar itself do that? The answer is, it probably wouldn't, right? You would either have to place a political obligation on Eurostar to do it somehow, right? So, for example, in the same way as SNCF created Ouigo, the cheap TGV product that serves stations like Marne-la-Vallée rather than Paris-Gare du Nord, that would be one solution. But I can't imagine that because of the international nature of Eurostar, that there would be a combination of the French government and the Belgian government that ultimately together own 80% of Eurostar, that they would agree in order to do that. So the alternative solution would be actually introduce competition against Eurostar, and then some kind of Ryanair style train, right, that would maybe run starting in Ebbsfleet or in Ashford rather than in London St Pancras, and then running to Marne-la-Vallée or to some other terminal which is less crowded than Gare du Nord, or less crowded than St Pancras, might be possible as a way and means of solving that problem. So I would answer that question differently. I don't see a way of obliging Eurostar to do that. And so therefore, I would see that competition against Eurostar on the London to Paris route or London to Brussels route would be the only way of managing to do something like that. There is at least adequate capacity on the track on the entire route in order to manage to do that all along. It is terminal capacity that is the main headache on Eurostar routes.
Thank you. Robin.
Briefly building up on competition issues. At airlines level, the EU has done quite a good job in promoting that competition, which led to, at some point, incredibly low prices, which is now finding its balance back to the top, which, you know, we can debate what the added value was, but in terms of easing travel for people, it was a great achievement in terms of what we've managed to do. We haven't done that in rail, and we've done it in the wrong way. State-owned companies, railway companies, have prepared the arrival of competitors on their internal market or across border, probably in a way that gave the totally wrong message to people, sacking investments, reducing the offers or the services in stations. And people saw that argument as, oh, we need to safeguard the railway system we have today, because clearly it's falling apart, because competition is going to rip us all and going to really tear our beloved railway company apart as well. And I think that preparation and the public image it gave to people was already wrong in that case. We can fix that and prepare to better competition also by EU actions on easing the purchase of rolling stock, for example, for new entrants who are in critical need of these new material or these new rolling stock to operate night trains, but also to operate high-speed rail if they want to. At the moment, it's incredibly difficult. The building those trains take time and a ton of money. So why not setting up a new financial framework for easing that purchase? Why not on the track access charges? Building up on the example Belgium has done recently to lower track access charge for new entrants in operating night trains across the country. Those are options that are available. It won't fix today the problem of Eurostars or Paris-Brussels, but it would create the potential for new market players to actually dare trying, and that is all we need. We don't know what the future will look like. Maybe in 10 years' time, we will have an incredibly new, innovative market player who will arrive with something that we haven't even dreamed of yet. But we need to create the market condition for competition to work in a positive way for people, which hasn't been, I think, the case lately.
Chiara?
I would say on the competition front, another positive externality is that competition really allows our industry and our sector to grow. So in the countries where there is competition on rail, independent ticket vendors are able to do a much better job at being present, at giving a good offer to customers. Italy is a very good example. Obviously, when there is more than one train, comparing train options seems more interesting for people, which goes without saying. But also, we have better relationships with the carriers, because the carriers themselves, because they have to compete, because they have to provide better services, because they have alternatives that their passengers can go to if their service isn't great. They do like to work with us because we do give them visibility in a space where otherwise they wouldn't have it. So actually, competition helps all over. It helps the customer. It helps the operators. In Italy, we've seen more traffic and more revenue for both the operators on the market since they've joined. So it hasn't really eaten away at their profits, and it's helped an industry grow on the independent vendor side.
And on that topic, I am myself a left-wing politician, and I find myself in this very uneasy situation of generally advocating right-wing solutions to a public problem. Free market, competition, tools that you generally use from a right-wing perspective, and that it's a bit frustrating, honestly. Not an identity crisis, but still. But just to say, it would be possible to solve this with a more traditional left-wing solution by the national governments telling their publicly owned railway companies to act differently. That solution is possible. It's just not being done. And that's also quite frustrating, because it used to be possible, and I mentioned that earlier, that it used to be possible, and in some parts of Europe it is still possible to go to a railway station and have good service from that ticketing vendor who might have like legacy access to ticketing platforms from other railway operators. That is still possible in some parts of Europe, but most people today don't buy the ticket from the ticket office. They want to do so online, and that is where the situation is really lacking. Any other comments or interventions? Yes.
Yes, hello, my name is Lucas Andreasson. I represent one of the Swedish regions, and we've been talking a lot about the long distance cross-border rail, but I wanted to ask both from a professional point of view, obviously representing a region, about the regional perspective in this and the regional trains. Where do they fit in if, for example, your journey ends with a regional train? Perhaps specifically in terms of the pillars 2 and 4 that you mentioned, Jon. And also from a personal point of view, I feel like there is already a Ryanair budget alternative from Brussels to Paris, and those are the regional trains. I've taken it before. It was a very weird journey, I must say, with 3 different trains in border towns in France and so on. So it does exist. So what role do they have? Thank you.
There's also going to be a new budget train for the Olympic Games, even actually on that route, although admittedly, sadly, with compulsory reservations. So there's a very important point, which is, do you have to plan this? Or is a regional train something you can just go and get on, right? Like, I want to go shopping on the other side of the border. So can I go and do it? And so that's one of the nicest examples of cross-border regional international train ticketing is the border of Germany to Netherlands between the towns of Enschede and Gronau. So the Deutschland ticket is valid to the first big town after the border, and OV chip cards, all of the Dutch public transport tickets are valid to Gronau, the first station on the German side. So it basically means whichever side you live, you can immediately get to the first significant place after the border. So that's one of the things which is most important for regions. Belgium, for example, is a disaster at that, right? So I had a cheap ticket as far as Visé to go to Maastricht, but then I need an extra expensive ticket to just do the last little bit at the border. So these types of things, how you then actually get those tickets, right? If I'm booking a single ticket to cross the border, I then need data access in order to manage to get it from the likes of Trainline. But you need to make sure that your public transport, whatever weekly cards, monthly cards, reduction cards for school children, any of those types of things are also that they work in border regions. It's also very important, again, out of quite bitter experience in all of these places, timetables on international trains are often really weak. So you are missing early morning trains and late evening trains on the international route because they're the least profitable ones. So it means, can you actually go and, I don't know, have dinner after your work meeting on the other side of the border and still get home by train? No. Whereas if you did that within one country or within one region, then you absolutely could. And so therefore, you need to begin to think that actually an international train, if that border is significant to your region, right? Is it something which is just people integrate into their everyday lives and they can rely on it? So to give a Swedish or Swedish-Danish example, I don't know which region you're working for, but if it's Skåne, then this is for you. I was in my project 2 years ago, I got chatting to someone in Copenhagen. He said, I take the train across the Øresund Bridge to go to the dentist. Right, so it's someone taking an international train to Sweden from Denmark to go to the dentist. Like, what is the most everyday, normal, boring thing? It's going to the dentist and he's taking an international train to do it. Now, you can only do that if the train is regular, the tariffs are solid, and it runs around the clock. Right now, the numbers of borders where regional trains are that good, they're quite few, unfortunately. Yeah, but those are some of the dynamics. If you want to afterwards talk to me about a specific border, chances are I've probably been there and looked at the regional ticketing for it.
And if I may, I think on the regional point, I think it goes back to the point we were making before that, again, we don't want to focus just on city to city and international because most people don't live in a big city. A lot of people live in places where they'll have to take another train to get to the nearest largest station or airport or bus station. So as far as MDMS is concerned, it was part of the conversation to what extent it should include regional transport. And I think the consensus was that this on this side of the discussion that it should, that the regional transport, regional rail is absolutely part of even the cross-border travel. So absolutely all of what we've discussed today, I think, should apply to regional, urban, local, peri-urban. Obviously, it's a slightly different conversation, I think, but at least regional transport should be in scope.
Thank you, Chiara. A question from the room.
Yes, thank you. Ian Catlow. I represent the Mayor of London and Transport for London here in Brussels. I just wanted to come back to the FRAND discussion. I'm just curious as to how the panel thinks that might be best enforced, because obviously fair and reasonable to a railway incumbent and fair and reasonable to a train line or other intermediary might be slightly different things. So how can that work in practice?
I guess this is for me. That is actually one of the questions that I think has not yet been addressed in the MDMS conversation. Yes, the FRAND principle makes a lot of sense in paper. The way this has happened in other countries where similar principles have been introduced has been through litigation and through regulatory intervention. And I think this will have to be a combination of the same. Ideally, the law would already start to specify a little bit to what extent FRAND applies to things like remuneration, for example. What does it mean for something to be fair? What costs need to be matched by the remuneration? So a little bit of that should be in the laws as much as possible. And then we do need a regulator to be there and to be present and to be empowered to help the smaller player, in this case, deal with this on the operator side. So I think it would have to be a combination of trying to define it as much as possible in the law, because otherwise, as with all things, obviously, if we give too much room for interpretation, each side will interpret it in the way that's most useful to them, and it will be hard to find a middle ground. But we will, of course, have to have quite a lot of space for regulators to come in and support these negotiations.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it makes sense to realize that for most operators, there is a cost to operating the train, and there's a cost to selling the actual ticket, maintaining the ticketing systems, ticketing office, support staff, remuneration, delays, and so on, to sort of separate and realize that those are two different costs. And then the secondary cost would be what constitutes what would be a fair and reasonable commission for another party to sell that very ticket. Because I think most consumers who book a ticket, they expect that the actors selling that ticket would be the ones responsible for making sure that you end up in your final destination. Yes, while you're on one operator in one of the legs, you might ask a question to a person working on that train. Yes, but still legally it does make sense for the ticketing vendor to be responsible for the cohesiveness of the journey. But then there needs to be some kind of legal framework to make sure that the operator who creates the delay or creates the inconvenience is the one paying, even though there might be some kind of automatic system for how those funds are transmitted. But I think we need some kind of legal framework for that to happen. Just expecting for the market participants to solve that by themselves, I think that would be naive. We have 3 minutes left of the event. Any final questions or interventions from the panel? Robert?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for organizing this. I would just come back on the regional train just a bit, because I think we can also address it in different ways from the left side of the hemicycle, also from the right side of the hemicycle. But there's a lot of potential for, as Jon mentioned, for cross-border public service obligations, but also what you put in these public service obligations. Do you force the operators who won the public service obligation contract to share the data? In my view, yes, that's part of what it should be done. It's not the case all the time. Do you make the competition for public service obligation contracts really open? It works in some countries. I was in Czech Republic a few weeks ago, and there you have, I took 3 different trains within the country from 3 different operators. It seemed to work well. And that's the last point. If you allow for that right obligations to be put in the contracts you set, you also allow players to innovate outside of this framework. In some trains, you would find it better because they have a specific family compartment for your children to play around, Or you really looking to take the train at 12 o'clock and you want to have lunch. Some trains could provide that services that others wouldn't because it's not doesn't fit their business model whatsoever. But I think there's a lot to be said about what types of services you want in trains. And that's a great call also for actual services in train. We shouldn't diminish the importance of how people deal with digital today. Lots of them struggle. Lots of them are not digital literate. They still need this person in the station, in the train, to talk to them, to tell them what to do. I struggle to book an international train online. I cannot imagine my dad doing so. And no offense to my dad, he's really smart, but he grew up in another generation. And maybe someday, we as 30, 40 years old, we will need someone to be there for us. And I think the level of services in the trains should also be there. And that is why I also mentioned this preparation of competition. We still need operators to provide these basic services to people. Lots of them are really important for them.
Thank you so much. And now to round off, I actually do think that this issue should be much easier to solve politically than it supposedly is. And I remember so strongly in the previous term when me and my German Green colleague Michael Kramer were working on the Commission proposal on rail passenger rights, and I wrote an amendment saying that all European railway operators must have open ticketing systems. And I did some legwork to make sure that other political groups in the parliament would support that amendment. And it was surprisingly easy, because the left-wing politicians all saw it as a way of advocating for consumer rights and for increasing modal shift to the railway sector. And all the right-wing colleagues in the parliament were in favor because it's competition, it's free market. So enormous unanimity in the parliament for this proposal. But then obviously that did not materialize because the council said no. Every single member state except Sweden voted no on this amendment that I had, and the only reason that Sweden voted yes is because the Greens were in government, and we forced the Social Democratic transport minister to vote yes because it was my proposal, and we were in government. But then it just died. I think the only way that we solve this is making sure that it's a big election issue. We make sure that in this campaign that there's broad support and that more politicians realize that the problem exists anyways, and that after the election, when the incoming Transport Commission nominee comes to the political groups, comes to the committee and answers questions, that there are questions from each political groups asking the incoming commissioner, what will you do about ticketing? Multimodal, yes, but especially multi-operator for railways. And I actually am quite confident because we are seeing so much political interest. There's so many people more traveling by rail all across Europe. So I think this should be achievable, and not the least thanks to Jon's work on this report and this excellent panel, and you all for joining this event today. Thank you very much.